Conversations with Lothrop. I'm Richard Lothrop, and I'll be your host for the next 30 to 40 minutes while we interview our guest, who tonight is Booker Peak, who is a professor of Afro-American Studies at Oberlin College and very much involved in educational issues. And we're so glad you're here tonight.
My pleasure to be here.
We look forward to having this visit with you. Mr. Peak has a bachelor's degree from Florida A&M University, and he has an MAT, which I believe is Master of Arts in Teaching.
That's
right. Right, from Oberlin College. And he came onto the Oberlin faculty in 1970. So you're rounding out almost 30 years, aren't you? Rounding out 29 years.
That's right. I'm beginning my 30th year here.
And you were originally a member of the education department, is that right?
That's right.
Right, and then it went out, and you moved over or upward or whatever it would be.
Yes.
Do you see education as a department ever coming back someday?
At Oberlin College, that's difficult to say. Each year, though, there are a lot of students who do want to go into education, and they speak to various faculty members and people in the administration about it. But I'm not sure. If you say someday, that's a long time.
Yes.
So if you're talking about it ever, I would say it probably will at some point.
But not in the immediate future, then?
I don't anticipate that it will come back in the immediate future, but you never can tell.
The reason I asked was I know there's a shortage of teachers from what I'm reading. And,
Yes.
And that's what I thought might stimulate it again.
Yes, there's a fairly significant shortage of teachers throughout the country.
Where were you brought up? Where was your hometown?
Well, my first reaction under these lights would be to say I'm from California, but really I'm from Florida.
Florida.
And we have plenty of sunshine down
Yeah, I
there.
was going to say there's sunshine there.
Yes. I'm from Jacksonville, Florida.
And how did you choose Oberlin for an MAT?
Well, when I finished up my BA work at Florida A&M University, which was then an essentially all-black institution in Tallahassee, Florida, I was looking around, and I was primarily interested in high school teaching. I mean, that was basically my first love. And I just saw an advertisement, the name Oberlin College. And I remembered that my high school teacher, back in 1956, 57, had come from Jacksonville, Florida, to Oberlin College in a summer institute, mathematics. Back then they had these NDA summer institutes as America was trying to catch up with the Russians. And she had come here. And that name stuck in my mind. So when I saw it, I guess 6 or 7 years later, I remembered the very wonderful things that she had to say about coming north to this place called Oberlin.
Did you ever think then that you'd be on the faculty for 29 years?
At that time, absolutely not. As I said, I was solely interested in becoming a high school teacher, junior high school teacher, high school teacher. That was my sole focus.
So was it exciting when you got the chance to come back as a faculty member?
Well, I came here and completed the work in the MAT program and went back south and worked both in a college and in a high school. And was actually in graduate school at the University of Florida in the summer of 1970. I'd been there for a year or so when I learned of the opening here in the education department. And I came thinking that I would probably be here 1 or 2 years maximally. But came and got so involved in the education department and all the exciting things that do happen in this town. And lo and behold, I looked up and almost 30 years have passed.
Isn't that amazing? Yes. Has Oberlin College changed very much in these 29 years?
My first reaction is to say, no, not a lot. The changes are not significant to me. Until, however, I look in the mirror. And then I realize, that a lot of changes have occurred. The students then were always 17, 18, 19, and 20 years old as they entered college. Almost 30 years later, they're still 17, 18, 19, or 20 years old. So I don't really personally see a significant difference in the students. In in general.
Except that maybe they seem younger.
Oh, yes, they keep getting younger and younger and younger. Now, I tell you, there's a difference in the student body in terms of, seems to me, the ethnic composition. There are certainly, I think, far more Asian American students at Oberlin College now than there were in 1970. And there's no doubt about it, there are far more female faculty members. That is a real difference at the college. But aside from those obvious differences, I honestly can't say that the differences are significant. The behavior of the students is somewhat different because when I first came here, we were still at war. We were at war with the Vietnamese, North Vietnam. So that kind of tension then doesn't exist on the campus, that kind of focus of students. But overall, I don't see a significant difference.
Have you changed your teaching techniques at all?
Not a whole lot. I've always loved to engage students in the kind of dialogue that we're having here, and my classes have always been open to immediate criticism rather than waiting until the end of the class period or until I finish lecturing on a point. There's been no significant change along those lines. The students come in each year seemingly very excited about learning. I just feel fortunate I think we all feel fortunate at Oberlin College to have so many bright, energetic, and very socially committed students each year. And it doesn't take a lot to get them motivated and directed. They are as challenging today as they ever were.
What's the enrollment roughly in the Afro-American Studies program?
The enrollment each semester varies, but I think it fluctuates between 250, 350 number of students. And most of the students, not surprisingly, are white students.
So you say that's not surprising?
No, I mean, given that there are probably only a couple of hundred black students at Oberlin College, so out of a student body of 2,800, it's not surprising that the great majority of the students in our classes are white.
Okay. Let's talk about the dorms at Oberlin for a moment. We have here, I guess you'd call them almost program dorms, but we also have them divided somewhat by racial mix. We have the Asian American house, we have the American house, we have the Afro Heritage house, we have the Third World. Some people think those are great, and some people think not so great, and some people aren't sure. Do you have any reactions you could share with us on?
I almost never have any reaction until I get asked the question, or some problem will typically arise on campus in which students or others may ask questions along those lines. It has over the years been a fairly heated topic in some circles. Some people are not as comfortable knowing that there are dormitories where the majority of the students represent a particular race or a particular culture. But for the most part, there have been very few complaints. Most people seem to understand that all of these program houses are designed primarily to strengthen and enrich the academic programs of the college and the life of the students. These dormitories are not rigidly segregated, as one might have thought. Students from various ethnic groups and backgrounds intermingle and work together. But they do give a certain focus to the particular interests or cultures that they represent. And it is an excellent learning environment for all students, but it is especially a strong environment, a very supportive environment for students from the various ethnic backgrounds. I think that controversy will go on forever. I mean, there will be people for a long time who worry about too many blacks being in a dormitory or too many Asian Americans. But I think the great majority of of people, and especially of the faculty and the Board of Trustees, I think all would be supportive of the program houses.
Let's turn our attention to the public schools, something that we talk a lot about in Oberlin, and something I know that you've had a great interest in. We're in a unique situation, of course, in a college town, and we have smallish community, and we have this very wide spectrum, if you will, of population and expectations and so forth. And we're doing, I think, quite some good things with the college and the schools interrelating. And one of these is the WAVE program, W-A-V-E, which I understand, I think I wrote down what that means. Words are very enjoyable.
Yes.
Could you tell us about that?
Well, the WAVE is, as you indicated, Words are very enjoyable. It's a program designed to motivate, stimulate, and work with children in the Oakland Public Schools. It is essentially an expansion of the work that I do during the regular academic year, in which many of my students participate in the public schools. They tutor and work with teachers and work after school with parents and their children. WAVE operates primarily during the summer months, and it is simply designed to energize and try to raise the overall academic standards of the community. It is open to all students, but primarily, and we focus on children who are perhaps a little less motivated, less self-directed, and who need a stimulus of a sort. And WAVE is a program that tries to provide that, particularly during the summer months.
And let's see, IS is a part of that, isn't it? IS means what?
Yeah, IS is instant success and should be is me, IS and ME. Minimum effort. Instant success, minimum effort. That is not really a new concept. It applies to how you get students who typically are not motivated to become motivated. And what I encourage my tutors to do, and those who work with me in WAVE, is to apply is me. And that merely means that they would take any student, however unmotivated he or she may be, and if they're able to create an environment in which the student is able to experience academic success with a minimum effort, basically they begin to have that student hooked on learning. You just multiply those moments of is me, instant success, minimum effort, thousands and thousands of times. And the child basically, without even knowing what he or she is doing, grasp the material and begin to find the excitement and the pleasure in learning that many of us have found.
So this is basically at the lower grades?
This is simply a methodological technique for working with essentially any child or any human being who may not already be motivated. That is, you just create an environment in which there's instant success. And as a teacher or a tutor, I have the latitude to adjust the material so that I can create an environment in which the child can begin to learn almost instantly. And his or her progress thereafter is fairly phenomenal.
So you could do it first grade, you could do it second, third.
Yes, it doesn't matter the grade level, the age level, or the ethnic background, or the economic background. In fact, all of us human beings have experienced is me as we learn, as we absorb this culture. As we were born, we didn't speak English, and we had to babble, we had to mimic words, but we got encouragement from our parents. And we soon learned that as we perfected the technique and articulated the sounds better, we were able to get the rewards quicker. But it was a long process. It didn't occur overnight. And it's the same thing with teaching children when you reach them at 10 years of age and they're not motivated. You create an environment in which you are prepared to work at their level. It doesn't matter if they're 10 and should be reading on the 5th grade level. If in fact they're reading on the 1st grade level, then that is their reality. That is their world. ISME means that you focus on where they are. That is where they are. And that's where you work. And so therefore, at that level, they experience success. They experience the joy of learning. But if we try to teach them where they should be, which is not their reality. So ISME insists on working with students at their particular level. And one can do this in a tutorial arrangement. I mean, it's very difficult for a high school teacher or an elementary teacher to apply this with 30 children. But on a one-on-one basis, it can be done. And that's what WAVE tries to do in providing one-on-one tutoring, as well as the practicum course that I offer, in which children can get the one-on-one help. The point is, they can learn. They are healthy. If they're healthy and normal children, they can learn as well as any of us have learned. They just need the support. And clearly, nothing in our society is more important than the education of our children. And in today's world, particularly in this country, the education of minority children and poor children, because that will make a significant difference. The quality of their education will significantly affect the whole quality of our entire lives. As poor people get better educated and involved in the political process, and as they get better educated, they will naturally get involved in the political process. So we all would gain from an improved quality of education.
That brings us to a word or a term that's getting a lot of attention nationwide in Ohio and in Oberlin, proficiency tests.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any comments at all about, first of all, just the general concept of proficiency tests? Are they good? Are they bad? Are they cause or effect? Are they reacting to something, or how do you?
Well, yes, they are certainly a reaction to something. That is, politicians are slowly becoming aware of the importance of education and of learning, and the need to have checkpoints along the way. And the families who educated their children many years ago and today, proficiency tests weren't needed. They basically monitored their children's education from first grade until the children graduated from high school. So they had a good idea, year after year, month after month, week after week, how well their children were doing. But many children from other families had no idea how well they were doing. Their parents didn't have any idea how well they were doing. And the quality of education suffered. So proficiency tests provide a kind of gradual testing points, checkpoints, so that teachers, parents, the community, all have an idea whether or not children are at a certain stage, or at the stage they should be, or at the stage that we've defined that children of a certain age should be, whether they're making the progress or not. More importantly, everyone has an idea that, when he or she's in first grade, or the community has an idea, where children should be by the time they're in the 9th grade. I mean, the plan is laid out. There's nothing new about that, as I said. I mean, in any good educational program, a sense of where the child was going was clear in everybody's mind from the outset. But in poor families, in a situation where children weren't getting good education, that long-range plan was not laid out, nor was it broken down into bits and parts and pieces and signposts that would guide people through the curriculum. So although it is now politically motivated, I think overall it's a good idea for everyone to know at each grade level what children are expected to know, and to know how far behind they are, so something can be done. You know, once we know where a child is and what he or she needs to do, because they can get the help, they can learn. If they're behind, it's no problem if we understand what the problem is and get them the help that they need before they get to the 9th grade or 10th grade or get ready to graduate.
Oberlin schools, I gather, have lower test scores than we might expect in a town that has education sort of as its main industry. Does that surprise you?
On the one hand, it did. I will tell you, when I came here 30 years ago, yes, it did. Because I wasn't aware, though, that there was also there's an economic divide in this town. Today, for example, it takes almost $30,000 a year to attend Oberlin College, and the median income in Oberlin itself is just around $30,000. So in a town where the median income is around $30,000, once you know that and you understand the link between family income and educational opportunity and the taking advantage of educational opportunity, it doesn't surprise you that we have this divide. But given, as you said, the history of this town and the commitment of the college over the years to education, while it's not a disturbing phenomenon, it certainly isn't something that we're happy about. That is, we ought to be able to work to improve the quality of education in this town. And I believe that the college has always had an interest, but I think in the past 5 or 6 years, that interest has intensified, and I believe there's far greater emphasis on the part of the college to involve students and faculty in all aspects of the educational program of this town. There is so much we need to do. There's so much I feel we have to do. In spite of that economic challenge, I mean, we're not going to close that gap, but we can, in my estimation, improve the quality of education significantly, even or in spite of the economic divide. But it doesn't surprise when you know the economics of the town, then it doesn't surprise you that you have this intellectual divide.
There is I think a phrase in professional education that educators rebel against, and that is, I think, is something called teaching to the test. Is that a danger?
Well,
is there a danger of aiming a curriculum just to pass certain tests?
Well, yes and no. It is a danger if indeed a teacher knows what's on the test, and a teacher therefore teaches a class. There are 100 problems, and the teacher teaches the class only in terms of those 100 problems. That would be a problem. But if it's a good test that we're talking about, any good test, one would have great difficulty teaching to that test. So I think, for example, the proficiency tests, I've had occasion to look at some of the tests, some of the questions, and I'm satisfied that it would be pretty difficult, say, to teach to that particular test. Now, what can happen is a choice can be made whether you teach toward the kinds of things tested on that test, or you do something totally different. And clearly a choice has to be made there. I mean, there are, for example, if the test is testing in, as it does in mathematics, and I mean, theoretically, if you wanted to teach something else other than mathematics, and you taught that other subject and didn't work on mathematics, obviously you could say you're not teaching to the test, you're teaching what you think is important, even though it doesn't show up on that test. But aside from doing something like that, I don't think a person who wants to teach a person how to do well on the math section of the Ohio proficiency examination can teach the test. The test is fairly well constructed, though there are areas that need improvement, but it would be a difficult thing to teach the test.
What about this business that I see some school systems are doing now of attaching financial gains or withholding salary benefits for teachers regarding how the proficiency test scores come out? I think that's even crept into Oberlin a little bit as a bonus thing or something.
Well, that's very tempting.
Is that good?
That is very tempting on the part of people who are not involved in education and who want to do something to stimulate teachers as they would see it. But I think anyone who's involved in education knows that it probably is a bit unfair, if not very unfair, to hold teachers specifically or directly accountable for the performance of students on a particular test. I mean, if you were going to do that, it would be better to do it at the college level in this country. Why? Because, say, Oberlin College, we get a chance to select the students we want to enter this institution. So, if I'm a basketball coach, I'm going to draft all the Michael Jordans, and of course, I'd be happy to tie my salary tied to my success because I have chosen the Michael Jordans. But if I'm running a basketball camp and I have to take on anyone who shows up, which the public school system has to do, then it's very unfair. I think it's going to be a very divisive strategy to employ when you start attaching teacher salary to student performances. I think there are far better ways to measure the effectiveness of teachers far better ways to measure their effectiveness. And I'm strongly in favor of measuring and evaluating teachers to determine their effectiveness. But I don't think the primary or a significant criterion should be the direct performance of the students because, as I said, they have to teach whoever the students are. And those students come from a variety of backgrounds and economic levels, and therefore their performance is going to be directly tied to that factor. But it is a popular strategy that some people are beginning to use because we say, well, you know, productivity. A Major League Baseball player is paid based on his or his performance. The same in football and all the sporting areas. But teaching is a far more complex enterprise because it is so dependent upon external forces. So I don't think it's a good idea to do that.
I think we're at time where we could take a break. And let's take a short break and we'll be back. And what we'll talk about then is some of the problems that public schools face both in Oberlin and in other places. We'll be right back.
The media seems to move faster than ever. No sooner does something happen than the TV cameras are there covering it. There before almost anyone else. Almost. Please support the American Red Cross. The need is real. The time is now. Help can't wait.
Welcome back. We're interviewing tonight and having a marvelous conversation with Professor Booker Peak of the Oakland College Afro-American Studies Department. And we've been talking about proficiency tests and exciting things like that. And we're going to talk now about some of the problems that public schools face. Not just in Oberlin, but in general. Then I listed some of these. And let me list three sort of general ones, and then maybe you can jump in on any of them, but particularly. One is the challenge of the wide range of abilities. And somebody about the Oberlin schools once said that one of the fascinating things to him was that there is not actually a bell curve in the Oberlin public schools. You have the very bright and those not quite so bright, and then in the middle you have the average student, so that you sort of do this. And that is those peaks and valleys make a challenge here. That's one thing. Then we have the wide range of economic and educational backgrounds in Oakland. So we're sort of like the city schools in some ways, and much smaller. And then last, we have the discipline problems. The unruly kids who do not want to learn can be disruptive and prevent others from learning. Now, having thrown that at you, you want to have some fun with some of those?
Well, all of those clearly are challenges that teachers face, which is why I said earlier it seems so unfair to place on their shoulder the responsibility or tie their salaries to the performance of these students, because those conditions were not created by teachers. Those conditions affect the kinds of students the teachers have. And almost every teacher in the public school system has this problem of the variability of academic readiness and achievement of their students, and they have to adjust. It's a very unnerving thing, but it's a fact in educational circles today that you're going to have children at one end of the spectrum and those at another end. And it is very difficult to overcome that fact. Again, that's a phenomenon that we don't have at the college, basically. That is, again, we get to select the students we want. But even so, when you get all bright students together, in a certain sense, you still get a kind of variability, certainly in their abilities and their readiness. But it certainly isn't as acute as it is at the elementary, junior high, and senior high school levels. So that is just one significant challenge that public school teachers have to face. And the good ones are able to deal with that very effectively, and the weaker ones have trouble, but with training and support from the stronger teachers, they deal with it fairly effectively. But it is a very difficult problem. The other with the family income, as I said earlier, yes, family income is not the sole criterion determining the quality of education of the children, but it is a significant factor. And it turns out in our society that some families have more money than other families. And where the community has a lot of money, then that community typically is going to have a strong public school system. And again, that is a factor that teachers cannot control. I think the other had to do with, what's it, discipline?
Discipline.
Clearly, discipline, the level of discipline or the lack thereof is a part of function of, is a real part connected to children before they get to school. The kinds of home from which they have come, the environments in which they've grown up, and once again, they present these challenges to teachers. So you just named 3 challenges that teachers must face each day in their lives, and those challenges are not going to go away. Now, as I said, what do you do? That's where ISME comes in. Again, this sense of instant success, minimum effort. In order to reach those children who are coming from, with all these various abilities, who are coming from homes with different income levels, who are coming with various disciplinary problems, the way you're going to connect with them fairly instantly is to create an environment in which they can succeed. Now, granted, in a classroom of 30 students, a teacher, as I said earlier, couldn't begin to target each student individually or have a curriculum for each student. But the best teachers tend to be able to connect, either with a smile, a nod of approval, a certain sensitivity that they can give each and every student. They may not be able to, as I said, have a lesson plan designed for a specific student, but there's a certain kindness, a certain respect that they can give each student. And being able to do that has a profound impact on the quality of education that a given teacher can have on a particular student to overcome those problems over which he or she had little to do with in causing. But he or she can respond in a responsive way to those problems and make things much better, both for the teacher and for the students involved.
I did want to ask you about, well, we've talked a little bit about general areas of problems, and some of these, of course, affect minority children more than they would probably others. Do you think the response of our community is what it should be to some of these problems?
Well, if you're comparing our response to that of other communities, we have done, we are doing, and I think we'll always do a good job, comparatively speaking. If you're talking about what we should be doing, what we are capable of doing, the answer to that is an easy one. We are nowhere near what we are capable of doing or what we should be doing, and what I think we must do ultimately in terms of closing the racial divide, not only in this town but throughout this country. In the 1970s and before, the real racial divide was clearly drawn along the color line. Well, in 1999, color is a factor, but it's a different kind of problem today, where the conservatives of the past, for example, based everything solely on color. And this is why Martin Luther King exhorted us to de-emphasize the importance of a person's color, because he was speaking in an era in which color was the deciding factor. Well, we moved in 1999 where color, or the conservatives in 1999, do not make color the issue. They make what they call merit the issue. And that sounds great if we had had a country that throughout its history had been based on merit. But we don't have that history. Now, in order to have that history, we have to recognize the adverse impact of having lived centuries in which color was the deciding factor. So there is a racial divide, and today it's long, as far as I'm concerned, the primary racial divide is in education. That is, we have to close the gap, educationally speaking, in order to begin to provide a level playing field in the 21st century. And I don't think we are anywhere near addressing that. But that's a national phenomenon, not an Oberlin College or an Oberlin public school system phenomenon. But I think we have to get started because we have the resources, the college, the town, we have the interest, we have the concern, we have the number of, the influx of so many talented students. We have the kinds of resources in our little town that most cities throughout this country do not have. So while it is a national phenomenon, I don't think we should rest on our laurels comparing ourselves with all these other towns and all these other cities throughout this country. America needs to move forward, and I think it moves forward by small towns like Oberlin taking a much greater responsibility in deciding that for the 21st century, we're going to have a first-rate educational system right here in the Oberlin public school system so that college faculty members and other townspeople will not be motivated to send their children to private schools. We should say that one can get a first-rate education here, period. Now, as you said earlier, students can get a first-rate education now, but in terms of all of the students getting that, we're nowhere near that level, and that's where we must go. We have the resources, and I think we have the will.
Do you see the role of the churches being more dominant than they are now?
Well, churches have always played an important role in American society, and particularly the black churches. But whether or not they are going to provide the leadership on this educational matter is a matter for debate. I think, though, that the imposition of the Ohio proficiency exams gets everybody's attention, because what's clear to everybody is that just staying in high school until you reach the 12th grade isn't sufficient. You have to pass these tests. And I think that's a good wake-up call, and that's one of the good functions I think those tests provide. So I think churches will, because many of their members have children who are in the schools and who must pass those tests, will play a more dominant role.
Is the Oberlin Black Alliance helpful in this? I don't know very much about that organization.
It has been a very significant force in the past 5 or 6 years. At Oberlin College, for example, this year they're running a program in mathematics at African Heritage House every Saturday. And so they're inviting children who need help with the mathematics section in particular to come to African Heritage House. And this isn't the first year they've done this. So there again, the imposition of this Ohio proficiency exam is driving and focusing everybody's attention on what has to be done. And one of the things is students have to do better in mathematics.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're almost at the end of the program, believe it or not. Things go fast when you're having a good time. Let me ask you one final sort of general question. Thinking back over almost 30 years, how would you assess racial relations now in Oberlin over these? That's the first part. And then would you make a prediction for the next 10, 20, 30?
Well, as I said, racial relations. We're facing different kinds of problems today. They are subtler and therefore more difficult to address. The educational gap today between blacks and whites is about as great as it was 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that gap gives me cause for great concern. I don't believe the racial conditions can ever be what they should be until we narrow the educational gap. And I don't know the extent to which we understand the importance of that. It doesn't seem to me that most Americans feel that the education of blacks is as important as the education of whites. That's understandable given the history of this country. But what's also understandable is that we should recognize that we need to tap into those resources, that we cannot go on with a society so divided, educationally speaking. Because if there is this educational divide, there is sure to be all other kinds of divides that are unwelcome, that are divisive, that will destroy our nation. And we must attack the one thing on which we all agree, the importance of education. And all I ask is that we broaden that definition to underscore it is important for black children to get a first-rate education. And I just don't feel that we have addressed that properly in this town or in this nation.
Did you see any improvement, to say, in the last 30 years on it? Or is it just more awareness of the problem?
Well, no. What has happened in the last 30 years is that there has grown up a much bigger black middle class. And as I said earlier, where there is money, the quality of education typically improves. So in a certain sense, the quality of education of blacks has improved for those blacks who are middle class. But at the same time, there is a growing lower class, economically disadvantaged class, that's widening as well. And my point is that unless we address this educational divide, little will matter. To me, you cannot possibly close the racial gap unless you address the educational one. And we all have so much to gain from that. See, my challenge is to convince white Americans that the nation profits as blacks get better educated, as opposed to whites believing that they are doing blacks a special favor and that they don't gain anything from better educated blacks. Clearly, the entire society profits when any child is well educated. And as we go into the 21st century, we're becoming more competitive, and the world is shrinking, we can't allow so many uneducated people to be in the society, left alone, and it would have to be taken care of. But as we educate them, they become full partners, contributors in all aspects of American life, in the sciences, in music, and in the politics of this great nation. So the education of every American child should be the highest priority of every family, every school teacher, and every college. And I see, as I said earlier, that Oberlin College has, as does every college, a major responsibility to see that the quality of education within its sphere, especially for blacks, but for poor whites as well, that quality of education is as fine as it could possibly be, because it is an investment. It's an investment in all of our futures, not just the black future, but the white future, the Asian American future, the Hispanic future, and the quality of life we all wish to enjoy in this country as well as throughout the world.
On that note, I think we'll close it. Are there any final comments you want to make at all?
No, it's been a pleasure being here.
It's been great to have you. We appreciate your coming so very
Surely.
much, and I think we've all started to become more aware of some things than we probably were 30, 40 minutes ago. So we thank you very, very much for having been with us this evening. We will be back on the last Thursday of October with another interesting guest. In the meantime, this is Richard Lothrop saying thank you very much for joining us, and good evening.